everyone, and welcome back to the Diverse Thinking, Different Learning podcast. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I do want to let you know that we will actually be taking the next 3 weeks off. Well, I will be taking the next 3 weeks off to spend time with family and prepare for the transition back to school. And so what I've decided to do is to re-air 3 early episodes that really focus on supporting differently wired kids and really preparing parents to advocate for their kids as they transition back to school. So the first of these 3 episodes is with Debbie Reber. And this episode really focuses on raising differently wired kids with joy and confidence. Enjoy. If you have a child who thinks, learns, or experiences the world differently, you have to listen to this episode. Today, my guest is Debbie Reber. She is a parenting activist, a New York Times bestselling author, keynote speaker, and the founder of Tilt Parenting, a top podcast, community, and educational resource for parents raising differently wired children. You have got to listen to this conversation. It is so powerful. Let's jump in.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Debbie Reber, welcome to the Diverse Thinking, Different Learning podcast.
Thank you, Karen. I'm so happy to be here.
I am so honored that you are here. You know, I've been following you for a while now, and we had an opportunity to meet at the Visions and Leadership Symposium at Bridges a couple years ago. I can't believe it's been a couple years already.
Yeah. It was so nice to be with everyone that weekend. I still think of it fondly.
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, I've been following your journey and listening to your podcast, and you actually inspired me to launch this podcast. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. That's awesome.
Thank you for all that you do. And, you know, we were speaking just before we started recording. I was just thanking you for all that you do, because I feel like you've inspired so many people to lean in and really honor the differences in the way that our children are wired. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that. You know, I've had a number of professionals on the podcast. You are the first parent. And, you know, the professionals are important because they support kids who think and learn differently, and they can help with kind of understanding a lot of the differences. But you've actually walked the walk, right? And you're the first parent to be interviewed. And I reached out to you because you are a parent who is raising a differently wired child. And you're doing it with such grace and such strength, and really honoring your son Asher's uniqueness and gifts through your work. And so I just, again, feel so honored that you are here.
Oh, thank you so much. And I will say I am still walking the walk. So it's not over.
It's not over. It's not over. And I'd love for you to begin by just talking about that, the evolution of your experience from a mom trying to find the right help, support, and even the right school for your child, for Asher. I know that you were even in Amsterdam for a while, to your advocacy work. What was that transition and that evolution like? Can you walk us through that?
Sure. Yeah. And it really was a long journey, and it wasn't my intention to be doing this work when I became a mom, that's for sure. But you know, raising a child who, from a pretty young age, we knew was more intense. We knew was very bright, precocious, challenging, strong-willed, all of those labels. You know, just kind of, we realized pretty quickly that this was just going to be a more intense form of parenting. And so it wasn't going to be as easy as finding the perfect preschool and going there and assuming there wouldn't be any challenges, or signing up for this or that camp and just being able to drop off and pick up with no issues. And so, throughout the preschool years, we started to wrap our head around the fact that our son was neurodivergent. We didn't know exactly what was going on. We got some preliminary diagnoses of ADHD and PDD-NOS, and also profoundly gifted from an IQ standpoint. And it just kind of made things more complicated. It made things more challenging for us as parents to know how to support this kid, and then also trying to figure out what is the right educational fit and how can we find an environment where he can learn the way he learns and be emotionally regulated at the same time, which was not easy. And so, we bounced around from 3 different schools in 3 years for K, first and second grade. And then, as you mentioned, we ended up moving to Amsterdam because of my husband's work, but it gave us kind of a fresh start. And I actually decided to start homeschooling at that point. So we homeschooled for 6 years. Whew, I still can't believe that we did that, but we did. And it was the most powerful time. It just changed me as a human, as a parent. It helped my son really get out of kind of this perpetual fight or flight mode and start to really lean into his strengths. And we grew together. We learned how to do this together and how to design a collaborative school based on respect and strengths. And throughout that process, I really changed so much as a parent and decided I wanted to take what I'd learned and support other parents in doing this work and coming to this place with their own children.
Mm-hmm. And what are some of those things that you learned? Because I can imagine that you hadn't planned to homeschool your child, when you made that move and you made that decision. And, we're in the middle of a pandemic at the time of this recording, and a lot of parents have been in that role of supervising their children's learning. And obviously that's very different than homeschooling, but they are also learning a lot about their children by observing the way that they learn in a way that they wouldn't when they were in the classroom. Mm-hmm. And so what are some things that you learned? It sounds like that was a really critical period for you to kind of observe Asher learning. And you're learning a lot about yourself, but you're learning a lot about him at the same time.
Yeah, I think initially first of all, I tried to forge ahead with my own plan, right? I had curriculum and charts and spreadsheets and goals and all kinds of things. And that didn't work so well. And so my son kind of demanded that I pivot and change my approach. And so part of it for me was seeing that all the things I didn't quite understand were happening in the classroom, I could see close up. I could see that my son was someone who really needed to move his body when he was being creative or thinking or brainstorming or writing. I started to see how deeply he could immerse himself in something and how he would just want to stay there for hours, if he was really in the flow, and then how disruptive it would be, or it had been at school, to just be like, okay, time to change subjects, stop what you're doing and move to something completely different. So I just really learned why school had not been a success. And I started to really understand the things that were challenging for him, but also all the strengths that he brought to his learning. So that was him. And then for me as a parent, I had to really confront all of my own ideas about what learning should look like. What does it mean to get an education? What are my ideas around milestones or expectations for what should happen when, and where should we be by the end of this grade? I had to constantly confront those ideas and challenge them and realize that holding my child up to these kind of arbitrary guidelines that are set by an archaic educational system, we're not serving the big goal, which is raising a human who really knows himself well and understands how to kind of lead with his strengths. So that was kind of my personal journey.
Mm-hmm. And you're really talking about something we had discussed on this podcast before with Maureen O'Shaughnessy, who talks about the importance of micro schools. And she had experienced something very similar with realizing that the educational system was not serving her children. And if you want to help them to become critical thinkers and to develop their creativity, you have to really have an environment of learning that supports that. And it sounds like from the work that you are doing and from the work that a lot of people are doing, there really needs to be a shift and a change in the way that we educate children in this country and in many countries, because I think one of the chapters in your book is about, square pegs in round holes. And, we know that 1 in 5 kids don't fit into that round hole. So instead of pathologizing them, how do we support them? And it sounds like that's part of what you were learning and realizing and has led to kind of what you're doing now.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that it's work that so many parents have a lot of resistance around, because it really is, it's shunning, for lack of a better word, this system that we have all been kind of bought into from before probably we even conceived our kids. It's just the dominant culture. And so to really turn away from that and say, this actually doesn't make any sense, and it's not serving the big goal here, that can feel really scary. But I'll just share this little anecdote. Last night, my son and I, he's 16 now, we were doing a puzzle together, and we were listening to an episode of This American Life. We podcast and puzzles, one of our self-care things right now. And the episode was about a 6th grader who had been kind of caught up by an adult who almost had a cult-like influence over him. And this child went down a very dark path. And Ash said to me, that's what happens when kids do not learn how to be critical thinkers.
That is so insightful.
Yeah. And I was like, bingo. And that really, you mentioned that before. And that is, critical thinking is the most important thing, I think, that our kids kind of grow up as adults who can think critically, who know how to advocate for themselves, who can be reflective and self-aware. And the current system, traditional model for education is not raising kids to have those skills.
Yeah. And it sounds like that's where there needs to be a change. Do you think, and I'm thinking about all the changes that happened over the past year, and it just seems like this is such a good opportunity to change and to pivot. I mean, we've already had this huge shift in the way we are educating our kids. And now that we're getting ready to send them back, it seems like this is such a great opportunity to change the way that we support them, because we've learned so much, and parents have learned so much by observing their children learning at home. Yeah,
I'm super curious to see what happens, because I was very optimistic, not about a lot of things at the start of the pandemic, but I was optimistic that this disruption to kids' education would be this opportunity to re-examine and to really change all the rules. And it is exciting to see, even with the college admissions process and just that, standardized tests are, we're just kind of realizing these things aren't, we can do without them and it'll be okay. I am concerned as we're starting to now look at returning to school and having hopefully a more quote unquote normal fall, that it's going to be easy to slip back into what we all know. And I certainly hope, I know parents have decided to keep their kids out of school. I think homeschooling has gone up because of what they're observing. And I just hope that when parents do return, if their kids are going back to school, that they hold on to what they've learned and they push for changes in their schools and just, always be looking to how can we make this serve our kids better? Again, zooming out and what the big goal is of why we're educating in the first place.
Right. And I hope that there is a shift. I think that parents have been very vocal during the course of this pandemic. And I hope that they continue to raise their voices and raise their concerns and to really encourage the people who have that power to change the system, to make some important changes that, again, support, all of our students and not just, those students who think in a traditional way and who are ready to sit at their desks and do what they're told and sit still and remember everything that they're told and focus without any difficulties. Because, we know that, more than 20 to 25% of kids don't learn that way. And it's not an optimal learning environment for them.
That's exactly right. And I know parents too are panicked, I hear this all the time in my community. I was on a webinar last night about teenagers. This came up. We have a lot of panic and concern about, learning loss, and our kids are tanking at school, or they're not motivated and they're not doing their homework. And I really hope that parents can kind of, not put pressure on their kids, but realize that we have more voice maybe than we think we realize. We can have more influence over how things unfold, and really, just as you said, advocating for what we know would serve our kids the best.
Absolutely. And you mentioned learning loss. And I think I'm hearing that on this end too. So many parents are concerned about learning loss and the academic gains that their children did not make. And, one of the things I was speaking at a school last night, I was saying that, yes, learning loss is something to be thinking about, but we really need to really emphasize supporting kids from an emotional and social perspective, because that's where they're going to need the most support. There's been a lot of anxiety. Kids have been away from their peers for a long period of time, and we really need to support them, support their mental health first and foremost, and then worry about the learning loss and the learning challenges later. Because we know, and if we're thinking about building resilience in our kids, the most important thing we can do is to connect with them, have strong relationships, and let them know that they're heard and they're seen, and we're validating their concerns, and we're here to support them in whatever way that they need.
Yeah. Everything that you just said, for 100%. The mental and emotional well-being of our kids has to be above all else right now.
Absolutely.
And, you, I'm sure, know this better than I do, but the research shows that when kids are stressed, when they're in fight or flight mode, there's no learning that's going to happen anyway.
None at all.
So we have to just kind of get them back to a place of emotional regulation and get their social lives back and start to get their motivation back and their mojo. And,
absolutely.
I think it'll take a while. I don't think it's going to be flipping a switch.
I agree with you. I completely agree that that's where the focus needs to be. And it is going to take a while. It's going to take a while. And for some kids, it'll take longer than others. And we have to be patient and be okay with waiting for them to be ready to learn again. But in the meantime, we just support them and give them the support that they need in order to be resilient and to thrive. One of the things you talked about was getting a diagnosis for Asher early on. And for many parents, that can be paralyzing. I've seen it where, I've talked to parents about their kid's diagnosis and what that means. And I always try to frame it in the strengths, a strength-based approach. This is a weakness for them. This is something that is harder. And that's how I explain it to kids. This is harder for you, but you do all of these things. You do exceptionally well, and you're so strong in all of these other areas. And we're going to get support for you in these areas that are harder for you. And that kind of normalizes it, because we all have our things that we're really good at and things that are harder for us, right? But there's still so much stigma associated with raising kids who are different. And you talk in your book about parenting from a place of possibility rather than a place of fear, which I think is just so beautiful. Can you explain to parents who might be listening what you mean by that? Because I think that is so important.
Yeah. I think in the book, I quote Neil Donald Walsh, who wrote this book, Conversations with God. I read it probably 20 plus years ago. And he talks about this idea that all decisions, everything that guides us as humans, it comes from either a place of fear or a place of love. And that's the only thing I remember from that book, but it stayed with me. And I really did notice that in my own life that, so often, and fear, by the way, is the biggest motivator, because fear of, I might make a wrong decision, or what if I do this and it screws up my child, or what if I do this, or what, we can what if ourselves all day long. And especially now, as we're recording this, just fear is pervasive. And so what I really encourage parents to do is to pivot that, first of all, to confront what those fears are, to get them out on the table so that we recognize them and understand how they may be influencing just the way we show up with our kids and the decisions we're making, and then reframe so we can parent from a place of possibility. Because especially when you're raising a neurodivergent kid, there is no clear path, right? There is no one way this has to look. And we kind of recognize often that the traditional trajectory of, elementary, middle school, high school, college, career, just the way that unfolds or seems to unfold for many families in this very predictable way is not necessarily going to be our experience with our kids. And so we want to kind of lean into that and start reframing and thinking, okay, maybe this is actually, maybe this awareness of who my child is and them understanding this diagnosis is going to be the thing that unlocks this opportunity for them. Maybe it is this thing that seems like a challenge that's actually going to be the thing that really drives them or enable them to contribute big in the world. And so we always want to be challenging ourselves and realize, where are we playing small? Where are we making choices because we're afraid to kind of go off path and do something different, and instead choose love, choose possibility. And it's scary, but in my experience, it always pays off.
Absolutely. And, when you talk about fear, and I think that that's kind of related to stigma, because parents often have this fear of what other parents will think. There's this feeling, and there's almost this feeling of shame or judgment. And one of the things I said initially was that it can be paralyzing from some parents, because again, if they're coming from that place of fear and even a fear of others' thoughts about what they are doing or their child, then that can keep you from making the right decisions for your child.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, one of the things I encourage people to do is to really examine their own, subconscious biases or, ideas that they have around neurodivergence. We need to dig that stuff up, because if we, as a parent, have this idea, for example, as I did, that kids with ADHD, I had a picture of what this looked like and I didn't like it. I was like, these are the kids who were out of control and they're this and they're that. Like I had all these, I didn't know what ADHD was, but I certainly had ideas about it. And so I had to do that work on myself to just bring to light the stigma that I was carrying around, and challenge that, do the work on myself so that A, I didn't parent from that place, and B, I could be part of helping to shift the bigger conversation, because we need to talk openly about this stuff. We need to not talk in secrecy about, what's happening with our child, because there's nothing wrong with them, right? There's nothing wrong with our kids who are differently wired. They are exactly who they're meant to be. And so it's that pivot that we need to make to confront our own issues, our own baggage, so that we can not show up with that kind of underlying everything that we do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And really celebrate the uniqueness in our children, because they are all different and they bring so much to the world in their uniqueness. And, one of the things that you've done so well is that you've really created this community, a community that really supports parents who have walked your walk, and everybody's walk is going to be different. But can you talk about what that support looks like in your community? I know that you have the Differently Wired Club. Can you talk a little bit about what it is and anything else you want to share about it? Because I know that so many parents are looking for support, looking for a community that they can connect with, where they can get acceptance and get support. And I think it's just so important for parents, because oftentimes the focus is on how do I support my child? But if you support the parents, you also support the child.
Yeah. Definitely. And that was really the idea, believe me, I have all the books on how to, support my child with, sensory issues and, all the things, executive function, processing speed, all of it. But so infrequently do we as parents kind of put the attention on ourselves, and we can support our families and our kids so much by supporting ourselves. And so that was really the idea behind Tilt. And, I have this podcast, as you know, and that is one way that I've really tried to use that to help parents start to realize that they're not alone, that actually there are these kind of universal experiences, no matter how different our kids are. And that has been so exciting. I'm very open in that podcast, and I try to always get in the head of my listener, like, what would they want to know from this person? So that is a big piece of it. And then, as you mentioned, I have something called the Differently Wired Club. And I created that really for people who are in alignment with the work that I do, who are really committed to doing that deeper inner work. And it's uncomfortable and it's not super fun a lot of the time, but they want that support of going through this with another group of parents who just get it, right? We have this unspoken language, or we can share about a hard time and everyone just understands right away. And so feeling really seen is a big part of that community. And so within that group, we have coaching calls and office hours, and there's a great forum. And it's exceeded my expectations in terms of the way that people connect. And then I will also share that I have it's actually growing so fast. I have to figure out how to better manage it, but I have a Facebook group called Tilt Together. And that's just a group where people can answer a few questions and then join. And there are so many fantastic resources being shared. And, people will share, this happened, or my child has this phobia or school refusal or whatever it is. And there's so much hard-won experience within that community, and lots of neurodivergent parents as well. And so it's just a very generous, safe place to get support.
That's great. I did not know about that Facebook group, but I'll definitely get that information from you and put a link to it in the show notes. We just need to do a better job of understanding and supporting kids who think and learn differently. And, one of the reasons I started this podcast was just to increase that understanding and let parents know that they have choices and give them more information so they can make better informed decisions on how to support their children. And, kids experience the world in different ways, and they learn differently and they think differently. And I just would love to pick your brain in terms of what do you think are some changes that need to be implemented to better support differently wired kids? And I know that's very broad. We could probably talk another hour on what changes need to be made. But, one of the things I'm thinking about is just school choice and making those school choices accessible and affordable for all parents.
Yeah. Yes, 100% to that. It is so hard to navigate, not just school choice. I just think about the IEP process, which I know, right? That is what we all like, oh gosh, like we have to start this process again for next year. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm still recovering from last year and I need to plunge ahead. I think that the systems that parents with atypical kids need to navigate to get the support that our children deserve and are legally, at least in the U.S., are legally entitled to having, the accommodations, the cost associated with assessments, all of those things. The systems that we have to interact with are really challenging. And so I think that those need to be re-examined. Again, when, you said 20 to 25%, and I think it's probably even more than that. Like, we should not be all like, the visual in my head is we're like, we have an ice pick and we're just kind of clawing our way up this glacier. Like, it shouldn't be that hard.
Right.
So that is a big thing. And I will also just say, I think the way that we expect kids to demonstrate their learning, we need to have a lot more flexibility there. Homework for our really bright kids is a complete waste of time. It's mundane. It sucks the life out of people and crushes the love of learning. And also some kids, like, writing a paper is not really their thing, but they could deliver a great oral presentation or make a cool video, or, I think we just need to start getting creative. I don't know if you know the book, The End of Average by Todd Rose.
I don't.
It's really good. But what he talks about is that when we design, schools, and he tells a story about designing the cockpit of Air Force planes. When we design things for the average person, we are designing them for exactly nobody. And I think that I love that idea. And I think we just need to figure out how to be more expansive in the way that we include all different kinds of learning styles, even within a traditional educational model.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great place. It's a great starting place, for thinking about the way we, help our kids learn and the way we design learning environments for our kids. Well, I really want to encourage all our listeners to pick up your book, Differently Wired, Raising an Exceptional Child in a Conventional World. It's on my recommendation list anytime I'm writing a report for kids, for parents who I know are going to need support in kind of navigating this new space that they find themselves in, because I just think it's tremendously helpful, and it comes from a place of love rather than a place of fear, like you've described. And encourage people to subscribe to your podcast, the Tilt Parenting podcast, and also listen to your TED Talk. It's really good. I think you were in Amsterdam when you did the TED Talk.
It was. Yeah.
And it really kind of summarizes, all of the things that we've spoken about today and where we need to go. And, when we think about the future of supporting kids who think and learn differently. And I just think it's just wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
So I just want to thank you, Debbie, for coming on the podcast, and thank you for all that you've done to help parents feel less alone and embrace and accept their children for the unique kids that they are. So thank you so much. It was such an honor. What is the best way for people to connect with you? Because I know that there are parents who may have just got a diagnosis for their kids or who've had one for a while, and, they're just struggling with trying to find the right support for their children, struggling with how to parent a child who thinks and feels differently. What is the best way for people to connect with you?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you also for having me on your show. I'm so glad you started this podcast, and I love the work that you're doing and your ventures. And I just think you are changing systems and supporting families in so many ways. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And so I would recommend people just go to tiltparenting.com. On the home page, there you can just scroll down. It's like, are you looking for support in school? Are you looking for, and you can just kind of pick an item that works for you. You can read the chapter of my book, Differently Wired, the first chapter, which is where I go into detail on my story. And that's a really good place for people to start. And what I hear from parents is that reading it helps them see that they're not alone in this. And that is really what we all want to feel when we're at the beginning of this journey.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Debbie.
Thank you.
I want to encourage you to check out the show notes for this episode. You will get information about Tilt Parenting and the Tilt Parenting podcast, and also links to where you can download the first chapter of Debbie's book. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this episode encourages you to be a disruptor, challenge the status quo, and parent from a place of love instead of fear.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.